Everyone here in the room, you have the agenda in front of you. For those on Zoom, I'll just go over this pretty quickly. It's a pretty simple agenda. So right now, we're doing the welcome. We're gonna go into then what to expect in 2025, especially because the landscape has, for the most part, completely changed here in Kansas and nationally. We're gonna go over some church-state separation, church-state separation 101. Then we're gonna give you a little break. Come back, and then we have a really exciting panel for you with Equality Kansas, 6 Degrees of Separation, and Planned Parenthood Great Plains that Laurel will be moderating. And then we're doing a little bit of what's next and what you can do when you leave here to fight for the separation of church and state and religious freedom. I think that sums it up. I'm looking at Laurel because I want to give a big thank you, and please help me give a huge round of applause for Laurel Birchfield, our advocacy director, who set this entire training up, who put together this entire advocacy toolkit, which is just stunning. Appreciate that very much. And then do we have the link online? On Zoom?
It's nice of you to acknowledge me doing this before we see how much of a hot mess this training.
No, that's why I did. That's why I did it. That's why I did it before, because I want people to know it wasn't my fault. I kid. All right, so now I want to ask a few questions, and if anyone on Zoom wants to chime in, we have our board members back there, Liz Bendit and David Smith. Thank you so much for being with us today. They'll monitor Zoom and they can throw some questions up for us or any responses that might be relevant. But first I want to know, like, who considers themselves new to advocacy? I'm just gonna get a temperature of the room. Okay, all right, so for those who are new to advocacy, because obviously I see a lot of faces of people who have been here a lot with Mainstream, who have been advocating for a while. So for those of you who say you are new to advocacy, how many of you have emailed or mailed your legislator? Okay, what about your local elected officials? County, city? All right.
You talking about everybody or just the new ones?
You know what, so like the new ones kind of went like this, so I know where you are, so we can do everybody. Keep your hand up though, new people, new to advocacy, keep your hand up after I say something that you have done. Please. So emailed or mailed their legislator, emailed or mailed their local elected official, being county or city. Okay, so how many of you with your hands still up have had personal meetings? Okay, all right, cool. That's good. And then what about attended a committee meeting at the state legislature, attended a county or a city meeting? Okay, a lot of hands are going back up. So some of you said you were new to advocacy. You're not. You're not. Don't sell yourself short. And then we do have some seasoned pros in the room as well. Let's see. So how many have been engaged with Mainstream before today? I hope our board members raise their hands. Thank you. All right, so about half the room. What about on Zoom? Do we have a sense of who has who's been engaged with Mainstream before today?
Most are, it's like half and half.
Okay, and that's about the room here too, about half and half. That's great. I love this. Because not only are we, carrying along and continuing to engage with our members and our supporters, we're bringing other people along. And so thank you for being interested in this topic. Thank you for being interested in making a difference. I'm gonna leave it there because y'all are pros already. So I'm just gonna call a couple of you up here to teach. Okay? Is that okay? Lots of shaking heads no over here. I'm gonna move this real quick. That's the acrobatics for today's show. And we're gonna go into our next section. Laurel.
Yeah.
Talked about this earlier in the welcome and the overview, but tell me, Laurel. What's the difference this year? What is so different?
Well, thank you, Michael. In a lot of ways, for those of you who have advocated before, this is going to feel like nothing's new. And in very unique ways, it's not. We're going into a second Trump administration. So we've done that before. We're going into another Republican supermajority in the state legislature. So we've done that before. For those of you who may not have advocated before, these are going to be kind of some interesting terms, interesting experiences that you'll have in trying to navigate some, let's say, interesting personalities that we'll be advocating with and for over the next 2 years. Now, what's different is that it's all to the next level. So this is federally the second time that we're going to see these kind of efforts to diminish our rights come about. And that means they know a little bit better what they're doing. At the state level, we have an even greater supermajority. In the past, we've been able to sustain the governor's veto, who thankfully, she has come out on our side with a lot of issues and supported LGBTQ plus rights and public education in ways that have allowed us to stop really bad bills. And we've been able to communicate with the state legislature, just enough folks to sustain the veto. This year, that's going to be a whole lot harder. And in some cases, we'll just say impossible. Anything you want to add to that?
No, you're exactly right. The House picked up the supermajority in the House picked up 4 seats. The other party, we're gonna call it what it is. We have Republicans and we have Democrats in the House. Mainstream is a nonpartisan organization, but it's very difficult to talk about the Kansas legislature or politics without talking about parties, because it is a party-based system, especially in the state house. So when you hear us say Republican or you hear us say Democrat, we're not disparaging a party. Either way, we're not lifting up one party or the other either, okay? So the Republicans picked up 4 seats, which gives them a super majority. They already have the super majority. We needed to, the Democrats, needed to win 2 seats and hold all the seats they had to break that super majority. Well, they didn't. And so as Laurel said, it's gonna be even harder this year to pass anything of substance. And we're gonna be on the defense like never before, especially with an abbreviated session. So as everyone here, and you may be talking about this, and I apologize. Does everyone here know that they essentially cut the session short? Okay, so it's still 90 days, but they're not taking that spring break anymore. So they start Monday, the 13th, and they're calendared to be finished on April 12th. So instead of taking that longer spring break and coming back for a veto session and to pass the budget, they intend to have everything done by April 12th, which means they are going to start in the first week with committee hearings. There's already bills that are pre-filed that are intended to be heard that haven't gone through either of the chambers.
Well, and those that haven't been pre-filed, we know are coming quickly. The legislature has taken away the budget process from the governor. Our state traditionally has the governor release her budget first after working with the departments, and then the legislature responds. And this year, the legislature has been meeting already to decide what they want the budget to be this year, and they're going to release it before the governor. So we know things are going to happen fast. We've already heard leadership say that bringing back anti-trans bills, banning gender affirming care is a top priority. Now, they also have taxes as a priority. So there's a lot that they're going to try and do in this very short period of time. But to Michael's point, yes, we are a nonpartisan group, but we stand for LGBTQ rights. And unfortunately, we have extremist members of a party in the Senate and the House who that is their #1 goal, is to tear down those rights. So we are going to talk about things in a way that calls out that extremism and calls out ways that we can try and stop that extremism. I think the takeaway for me, though, about how this year is going to be different and how we as advocates need to be different is that we need to find our wins where we can find them. So last year we stopped the gender affirming care ban bill. Very, very narrowly stopped it, but that was due in large part to having just an amazing coalition of partners and legislators who are in the state house working their tails off to stop that. It's going to be, I hate to say the word impossible again, but it's going to be incredibly hard to stop that bill this year. So we're looking for ways to find victory where we can. And that means that we're going to be building community like never before. You guys are here. Congratulations, you're part of the community, whether you want to be or not. We're gonna be asking you to expand your community and bring people in. We're going to be celebrating joy and victory and connection wherever we can, because that's how we're gonna get through this session. And I think that hopefully we come out of the other end of this bringing in all of this anger, all of this frustration, all of this passion, and having a stronger coalition moving forward, because we're playing the long game right now. We know that this year is gonna be tough, next year is gonna be tough. We're looking several years out and how we can start turning things around. And of course, we always have elections to be thinking about as well. Michael, you want to say anything about that, and especially the local election coming up?
Yeah, sure. I just want to say that elections happen every year in Kansas. I'm sure everyone in this room knows, or almost everyone, but we have elections every single year in Kansas. So per Kansas statute, on the odd years, we have the municipal election. So mostly cities, some counties in Kansas have elections in the odd years. In the even years, we have the federal election. So we're talking about US Senate, US House, presidential every 4 years, governor. So we have some statewide elections as well on those even years. And in Johnson County, we have on the even years, county commission races. And that's not in every county, but that's how we do it in Johnson. So there is an election every year. The primary, if there is one, is always gonna be on the first Monday following the first Tuesday in August. All right, so it's worded that way in statute, first Monday following the first Tuesday. Essentially, what did I just say? First Monday, first Tuesday following the first Tuesday of the month following the first Monday, right? That's what it is. First Tuesday of the month following the first Monday. Generally, that's going to be the first Tuesday of the month. But if the month starts on Tuesday, it'll be the second, right? We'll tell you all about that. I don't need to get in the weeds about that right now. But always a primary, or if there's a primary election, always one in August every year. Always one in November, a general election every year. All right, so this year we are looking at municipal candidates. You're looking at one of them right here. P.S. So I happen to be, and local is very important to both of us. I happen to be the mayor of the city of Roland Park, and we have Laurel, who's a council member in Shawnee, the city of Shawnee. And so local is very important. If you have any questions about how to get engaged at the local level, let us know, because that's where you can make real change. And I think I'm going to talk about that a little bit later, so I don't want to get heavy into that right now. But yeah, elections every year, I think, is probably the big thing.
And please, as we think about advocacy, think about elections as part of your advocacy too. I'm gonna pause because we do want to kind of talk a little bit more about exactly how we're asking you to show up this year. But we've dropped some terms, we've kind of talked about some stuff in the weeds with the legislature. So I just wanted to check really quick and see if we have any questions, see how our folks on Zoom are doing. How's everyone feeling with what we're talking about right now? Hopefully everybody's not feeling too much doom and gloom as we've been presenting things. Liz, do you have any questions from our Zoom folks?
Nope.
Okay.
But Laura, that is one of the differences this year that you pointed out.
Yeah.
It's doom and gloom, but like the anger, like last year, years before, we had hope. Or at least I had more hope. I'm not gonna put words in your all's mouth, but like we had more hope. This year we have anger, right? This year, as you mentioned, we have a different impetus. You know, it's harm reduction for the most part. And Laura will get into that in just a minute.
Yeah, and we'll be talking, like, we'll get more in specifics about the actual issues that Mainstream advocates for, and how we're going to be doing that this year. And so you'll see us talk about harm reduction with a couple of those. Got a question?
I don't know if you can answer this, but I would like to know what happened. No, let me just say, because we go to Corson's meeting every month, and they were so positive about getting seats and breaking the supermajority. I don't understand what happened.
Okay, so for the question is, and it's a pretty easy question to answer. What happened? Speaking of the general election, and I kid, it's not easy. The Democrats were, as was just mentioned, the Johnson County Democrats anyway, were very, very positive and very sure that they were going to pick up the seats that they needed. And on election night, it did not turn out that way. The returns coming in did not show that. Obviously, we know what happened up and down the ballot. I can give you my opinion, and it's a pretty brief opinion from what we've seen and the people that we have talked to, that I have talked to, is that we did see in Johnson County that there's a limit to the extremism that people will take. We had one Board of County Commissioners that was unseated. Our sheriff in Johnson County was unseated, thankfully, on both counts. They were extremists who were hell-bent, on dismantling democracy, dismantling our government here in Johnson County and Kansas. So there's a limit that Johnson Countyans will take. If you look at some of the local elections, you can see that as well. The state elections, the statewide elections, their campaigns and talking points followed the presidential campaigns and talking points. All right, if you go back and remember, the same issues, the same talking points, kind of the same strategy went into, the Kansas House and Senate that did at congressional level and the presidential level. You didn't see that so much at the county level. You didn't see that for the most part, like at the BOCC, the Board of County Commissioners level. You didn't see that at any of the other levels of the local government that we were looking at or that we were voting on. And therefore, I think that's one of the reasons. That's one of the reasons that we fared better on the local level than we did on the statewide level. That's all I'm gonna say there. Without, because I don't want to play the blame game with anyone, right, with any party. So Laurel, do you have anything to add there? She's smarter than I am, so she'll probably tell you exactly what happened.
No, I was holding my breath, making sure you didn't say anything that would make me cringe. Turnout also, like, we just have too many people who still think that they don't need to vote. And that's always gonna be a struggle, and that's part of what we're asking you all with moving forward is we've got to start showing up everywhere. We've got to start bringing our friends with us. We have to start talking. I mean, it's great to talk to your friends. I mean, it's great to look around this room and be like, I'm going to bring this person to my next advocacy meeting. I'm going to bring this person to a meeting with my legislator. But you guys are already involved. Even those of you who aren't seasoned advocates, you're here. We need to go out there and we need to get our neighbor who doesn't vote. We need to get our, kids and their parents who don't think that elections are worth their time anymore. We've got to do more. And on that note, I do want to kind of talk about just how we're asking y'all to show up this year with state advocacy.
I'm asking you first. So we were talking about this yesterday. I'm not putting words into Laurel's mouth, but I did mention that while voter engagement and voter turnout and registering voters is critically important, we can no longer indiscriminately register people to vote. We need to know who we're registering to vote. Do they share our values? Do they share your values? Right? Because if we indiscriminately register, but then don't follow up with people throughout the year, which is what happens a lot of time, they don't show up on election day. They don't fill out that ballot. And that's why we are committed as Mainstream to civic engagement, year-round civic engagement, and not just once the filing deadline is over, right? We're gonna follow up with the people that we have talked to because it's relationships at work, right? And the people that you know is who you need to get out first. I'll get off my soapbox now.
No, I think that's a good point. Okay, so I'm gonna have y'all, another question, yeah.
What did Sharice Davis do right? Her district had been gerrymandered and put into a very rural area. And she was all over Miami County. She was all over there. And she was engaged for years continuously. At least that's what I saw. I support her. But she seems to be a model of how you do it.
Yeah, the question was Representative Sharice Davids, how did she pull out a win in Congressional District 3? And then I heard, as you were talking, I think you pretty much answered your question. And then I heard it from a few other people sitting here. She showed up. Representative Davis everywhere, not just, in Johnson County. As you mentioned, she was in Miami, she was in Wyandotte, she was everywhere that she needed to be as far as it's all looking in from the outside, right? But during her tenure as Congressional Districts 3 representative in Congress, she has always shown up. Every chance she gets, she comes back home and she holds town halls and she listens to her constituency. So I think that goes a long way.
And not to put out a dirty word right now, but she does try to be bipartisan, She does reach across the aisle when it makes sense, but she stands strong in her values when it doesn't make sense.
It's not a dirty word.
It depends on who you're talking to. Yeah, it shouldn't be a dirty word. Anything on Zoom?
No, just complaints, they want to talk about Christian nationalism. Please don't spend time on what happened, you need to talk about Christian nationalism.
Promise you we'll get to that. I see one more question in the back before we move on to that. Did you want to ask your question, sir?
Oh, I was just gonna make a comment. Am I the only person in the room that thought the Democratic Party's election campaign was the worst I've seen? And I'm 86 years old. I kept waiting for our candidate to quote the president or quote Trump or have films of Trump saying the terrible things he says every day. And I never saw it. All I saw was our candidate say, nothing comes to mind. Would you do anything different than Biden? Oh, well, nothing comes to mind.
Yeah, so we've got some comment in the room for those who are on Zoom about kind of just how poorly our presidential campaign was run on the Democratic side. I think I'd love that conversation offline. I think you're raising some points, but to the point of our Zoom folks, let's move on and start looking forward. I hear you. And I think that you have some very valid things to talk about. Maybe after the training, we can chat about some of that. Okay, so let's let it look forward, because we can look back. It's a crucial thing for us to do in our analysis, but then we got to start looking forward. So looking forward to the 2025 legislative session. If you, those in the room, if you go to this page, How to Be an Advocate, I believe I've numbered the online version. I believe it's page 6. Again, thinking about how this year's a little bit different than in the past, here's how we're asking people to show up at the Kansas legislature this year, whether that means physically in person or online, using your social media channels, talking to your friends and family. Here's how we're thinking about showing up this year. If at all possible, we're asking people to follow committee hearings. They happen once a bill is introduced and a committee chooses to take a hearing on it. They open it up for testimony, and people can submit written testimony. They can do verbal testimony, and you don't have to go to Topeka to do this. You can actually sign up and use their video conferencing platform to be able to talk to them from the comfort of your own home, which is fantastic. And it means that none of us really have many excuses for not being able to try and do that at least once during this next session. It is during the day. I know people work and I know people have children at home. But if you have the ability to send in testimony when a bill comes up that you feel passionately about, and again, being just completely blunt and honest this year, probably bills that we feel need to be stopped, then please consider showing up in this way, in a very tangible way. Yeah.
So you're probably gonna get to this, but so like, how do you know what bill is gonna come up and when and time and all that stuff?
Excellent question. So the question from the audience is, how do you know when to give testimony when a bill is coming up in committee? Follow mainstream. That's honestly the easiest answer I have for you. We do send out alerts members, and it's a $35 membership for an individual. You can donate more through your membership, our membership platform as well. But if you're a member of Mainstream, we send out a weekly email that tells you what happened and what's going to be happening next week. We send out action alerts to say this testimony or this bill is being heard tomorrow or in 2 days, next week, whatever kind of advance notice they deem appropriate to give us. And we'll let you know. And then our goal this year is to make it as easy as possible to help you submit that testimony as well. The issue areas that we advocate on, which we'll talk about in a little bit, are the ones that we'll send those notices out about. But there are other organizations that say immigration is not something that mainstream actively advocates on at this point. But there are organizations, if immigration is an issue that you want to be following, there are other immigrations to be following for those kind of alerts. So get plugged in with us, or if we're not focusing on the issue that you want to focus on, get plugged in with another advocacy organization. And that is the easiest way to follow along. Because typically bills will be, we're given like a day's notice for a committee hearing to be able to submit testimony. Sometimes we get a little bit more than that, but often you get 24 hours. So you have to be following along with those who follow more closely. And then, of course, we asked this question at the front, how many people have actually met with your legislator? Build that relationship now. And here in Johnson County, we have a lot of friendly legislators. It's amazing to have those relationships. Don't take those for granted. It's a little more difficult with legislators who are unfriendly, but that's just as important. Meet with them, show up at their town halls, let them know that you are watching them, let them know that you disapprove of their position on the issues that you care about, because they need that reality. They need to know, they need to look at us and see that we're standing here saying, I don't agree with you. I don't want you voting this way. So a lot of legislators come back home during the weekend. They have town halls. Someone mentioned Senator Corson's meetings. Definitely show up for those. Sign up for your legislators' emails and follow them on social so you know when they're having those. And then in all of these opportunities, please be loud. As we are going to talk about the rise of Christian nationalism, one thing that you will hear us say is that they are persistent, they are loud, they don't care if they're right. They think they're right, and they're going to just keep saying whatever they need to say until people believe them. So we need to be just as loud. We need to show up and we need to voice our concerns in a way that lets people know we're here. And then finally, this is where it comes to, yeah, we have a question really quick.
Which Republican state senators even have town halls? Most don't show up for the library's legislative coffee.
Yeah, let me answer that one really quick first before we get the question in the room. So I believe the library legislative coffees are the ones the League of Women Voters put on. Unfortunately, a lot of, again, we're going to call out party names because this is the fact. A lot of Republican legislators don't show up for those because they don't agree with the League of Women Voters, one of the most nonpartisan respected organizations in our state, which just tells you something. And yeah, some of them don't have their own town halls. Some of them might have opportunities for you to engage. So if they don't have a physical space for you to interact with them, find them on social, find their email address, find other ways to let them know that you're following them and that you're watching them. Okay, the question in the room?
Do phone calls do any good?
I mean, it's an excellent question.
Because you said sometimes it's only 24 hours and, you know, you're busy and.
So calling your legislator to say, I oppose this bill does not go on the public record.
Oh, thanks.
So you want to submit the testimony. Now, you want to do both. You want to call them and say, hey, this is on your docket tomorrow. I don't want you voting for this. I won't say that it does a lot, but if they get 100 calls on it, they're at least going to know that they got 100 calls on it, you know? So make sure you're telling your friends to call too, but definitely testimony is what we need to do.
And we're talking state. When you're talking about testimony, it's state.
Yeah, everything I'm talking about is state right now. The last thing I want to say about showing up is kind of what we talked about earlier. Bring a friend, grow this circle, get more people involved, and then start showing up for things that you might not have normally shown up for. The one thing that I want people to really start thinking about this year is allyship, because we need to start showing up for the things that don't directly impact us, but impact our neighbor or impact our kids or our grandkids or our friends' kids, because they need us. Our equality work this year, I gotta tell you, talking to people who have been in the State House, Michael included, who have been advocating on equality issues, trying to fight these bans that hurt transgender kids, like they're tired, y'all. They need us, because when they are the ones showing up in the State House and fighting literally for their lives, they need us standing right next to them, or else they're gonna keep falling. They're gonna keep getting burnt out. And so allyship is the word this year for me. Show up for things that don't directly impact you. We need to let our legislators know that even if I don't have a trans kid, I care about protecting the safety, the life, and the happiness of trans kids in my state. Is there anything you want to say about that?
I would just say on the flip side of the coin, thank you. And yes, I think we're all tired. I'm exhausted, y'all. So please help. I'm never gonna get pregnant. That doesn't mean that I can't go to the state legislature and advocate for reproductive rights, something that I still believe in, even though it doesn't directly impact me. So I think, that's what Laurel's talking about. It's not, and we've talked about LGBTQ equality and rights. We've talked about some reproductive healthcare rights, public education. Here's one of the beauties of mainstream, I think, is like, you don't have to agree with everything. We don't have to be in lockstep with every single thing, right? The majority, I would hope that we all agree on, and plug in where you can, and plug in where you can be the best ally, and then ask questions on the issues that maybe you're not familiar with or that you're not quite sure about yet. That's all I have right now.
I think this is kind of a good time. I'm trying to keep us on schedule. I think this is a good time to kind of pause, just check in one more time. We do have resources to help people with the more in the weeds stuff about how to be an advocate, how to submit that testimony, how to show up at a committee hearing. And so if those are resources that are helpful to you, let us know. We'll coordinate with you. We'll figure out ways to get that information to you. But today we don't really want to get in those weeds just because, well, for starters, every committee has different rules for how to submit testimony. So we could be here for hours going through all the details of all of that. But our goal is to make it easy as things happen. And so we'll prepare y'all as we ask for you to submit testimony. We'll tell you how to do it. We'll make it easy for you. So are you okay if we kind of skip over the logistics of it?
No, I think we should. I think just the biggest piece of advice from today on how to submit testimony or how to give testimony is be authentic. Tell your story. You don't have to be the expert, right? Especially when you're an ally. You don't have to be the expert. Tell your story. Tell your loved one's story. Be authentic. And when I say be authentic, Laurel had to tell me yesterday what that meant. When we say be authentic, we mean don't lie. You can be loud, but don't lie. Don't say something that's not true, right? And if you're giving testimony in person and you get asked a question that you don't know the answer to, say that and say you'll get back to them. But you are not the expert, you're telling your personal story. That's written, that's when you're talking to your legislators, that's when you're emailing your legislators, that's when you're speaking and giving verbal testimony at the State House or at your local government.
Yeah, a lot of what we're saying can apply to local government as well, but we're focusing a lot of our stuff today at the state. Okay, so any questions about any of that before we kind of start talking about church-state separation? Because as we know, that is what we're here to talk about today. Anything on Zoom, Liz?
There was one person that included a link to another really great advocacy group called AIRRKC, AIRRKC. So maybe we can put that on I'll put like any other, in the chat, if there's any other URLs about like how to find out about bad bills that might be things that, mainstream doesn't follow, just drop them in the chat. And during the break, I will add them to the dry erase board. I think that might be the best way to do it for the folks in the room.
Yeah.
We can send it out too in a
Yeah.
follow-up email.
Yeah.
We'll do a follow-up for sure.
Yeah.
So if the Zoom folks didn't hear, if you have resources, drop them in the chat. We'll catch all of those and share them out after.
And then Alice wrote, the most important thing mainstream can do for testimony is to make it easy. Because they seem to deliberately make it difficult to submit. Also, in the past few years, there've been awful bills needing testimony with deadline the morning of the day after the Super Bowl.
It's funny how they do that, huh?
Alice.
Well, and we're hopefully rolling out during the KS Fair Maps, during the redistricting process, mainstream did come up with a testimony tool. So it made it really easy. You went online, you filled out a form, we had examples for you, you hit submit,
That helps.
yeah.
Tremendously.
Well, and then what it did also was it put it in the correct format that it needed to be in, and it emailed it to the correct people. And so we've used that for several different bills over the last couple of years. And so we're hoping to be able to roll that out again this year.
Okay, so let's talk church-state separation. And I'm gonna hand it over to Michael in just a second to kind of talk about why mainstream focuses on this. But let me, again, get a read of the room first, and Zoom, Liz, help us facilitate that. How many people feel like they have advocated on church-state separation in the past? Great. How many people feel like they're not quite sure how church-state separation kind of enters into our advocacy work? Perfect, thank you. All right, so for those of you who felt like you've done it before, we're gonna give you more tools and resources. We're gonna make you super confident so that you're able to carry on this advocacy work and center church-state separation in your work. For those of you who are kind of new, figuring this out, haven't really thought about how this impacts our advocacy work, same thing, we're gonna make you experts. Because as Michael said, you don't actually have to be an expert to talk about how things are going on, but we'll make you feel like one. All right, so you wanna talk about mainstream and why church-state separation, Michael?
Sure. Okay, so why? Why are we focused on church-state separation? Why are we focused on religious freedom? I do wanna ask, when you hear that term religious freedom, how many people cringe? Kind of, right? Kind of. But we shouldn't. Because we're not putting one religion over another, right? We're saying that all religions are important. You should be able to worship or to believe the way you want to believe. You should be able to change your belief at any time. And you should be able to not believe or not practice a religion, right?
Right.
There should not be one religion, which is what we're seeing a lot of lately with Christian nationalism, which Laura will get to in just a minute. But why this? Why now? Why mainstream? Because that's what we've always done. You know, mainstream was founded over 30 years ago by a group of cross-partisan community leaders. We had Representative Nancy Brown, Carol Sater were among the 6 founders. We had Rabbi Mark Levin, Judy Hellman, David Goldstein, thank you. Do what? Yeah, oh, I'm getting there, don't worry. And then we also had Reverend Dr. Bob Meneely, who founded Village Presbyterian Church and was our founding chairman of Mainstream. And so they believed very strongly in the separation of church and state, in religious freedom. And they actually mainstream came about because of reproductive health care rights. That's how mainstream started. Judy Hellman kept seeing news clippings and interviews with Nancy Brown about how she was being attacked, how her family was being, ostracized in the neighborhood because of the way she voted on a reproductive rights bill. She voted for reproductive rights. And Judy said to David, we need to do something. And they did. They got the others together and they started mainstream. Since then, that's what we've been fighting for. It may look differently every year. You may say, wait, you stopped fighting for church-state separation. You stopped fighting for religious freedom because you were focused on these issues. But as you'll see soon from our panel of experts, we didn't. It takes different forms. The through line to all of this horrible legislation, to 99% of these bad bills, is muddying the line or just abolishing the line between church-state separation. And we'll point back to that in just a little bit. Is there anything that I didn't cover that you want me to? Okay. Any questions about mainstream, about that part right there? And the whole time, we've been nonpartisan and will continue to remain nonpartisan. Sir?
As we're talking, briefing through this well put together package, I'm not seeing I think we're all familiar with the fact that the Constitution doesn't specifically address this. Can you give us some kind of constitutional perspective on all this that would be the foundation? Because constitutional wording seems to be primary to the Supreme Court right now. And can you give us a little background on it?
Sure. So the question was, can you give us a little constitutional framework or a little background on what the Constitution does say and the wording of the Establishment Clause? And the allusion or the alluding to of the separation of church and state. And Laurel is going to get to that in just a moment. Any other questions about mainstream or our work or what we've been doing? All right, I'm seeing none online as well. Literally the next thing.
Thank you for teeing that up. For those in the room, separation of church and state 101 in your book, I think is one of the pages that the gentleman in the room was referencing. For those who are looking at the virtual one, I believe you can find that on pages 2, 3, and 4. So you are absolutely correct. I raised my hand when Michael said who feels a little icky about the term religious freedom, because it has been co-opted. And it has been co-opted because people are able to go back to our Constitution and say, it's not enshrined there. The wall between church and state is not part of our Bill of Rights. It's part of Thomas Jefferson's letter later on. And that is factually correct. But the spirit of religious freedom, as we see in the First Amendment under our Establishment Clause and the Free Exercise Clause, clearly shows the intent of our founding fathers to make sure that the government is not involved in religion and religion is not involved in government. And then later on, we see early in the Supreme Court, we do see rulings that reinforce that. Now, let me pause and say, I'm not a lawyer. I am not a constitutional expert. I am just someone who feels very strongly about this and tries to the best of my ability to use this information in my advocacy. So if I get something wrong, please forgive me. If I say something that doesn't quite sit right, please let me know. And if you have questions that I can't answer, I'll get you an answer, because we do have friends who are lawyers and constitutional experts who I can go to. But the way that we kind of ground our work in church-state separation is through that First Amendment right. And in this page that is labeled Separation of Church and State 101, we have the language of the First Amendment. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, that's the Establishment Clause, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So the way that you can think about it is two different sets of beliefs in our First Amendment that protect the way that we view religious freedom. So the Establishment Clause is the freedom to believe. That means that the government's not going to say we all have to sit under one church. And then the Free Exercise Clause is the freedom to act. We get to practice our religion or our non-belief how we choose. Isn't that bad? So that's how we kind of base our advocacy in believing that these hold true today and that they are still principles that are worth fighting for. They are still the foundation of our government. Now, unfortunately, we've seen the rise in Christian nationalism, which is also a difficult term to define because it kind of depends on who you're talking to, how you're talking about it. I mean, a lot of people come to the table and say, religion's good. Why wouldn't we want religion in our government? Why wouldn't we want religion in our schools? Why don't we want morals that are being taught as part of here, primarily and specifically the Christian faith? Why don't we want that? And so the term Christian nationalist, lots of people are looking at it and saying, I'm okay with that. But if we really look at the definition, and the definition that I've included on page 4, I believe, which is the rise of Christian nationalism. This is taken from a great group, Christians Against Christian Nationalism. This is a group of faith-based peoples and leaders who are coming out and saying, no, we don't believe that Christian nationalism is the right direction for our country. So they've defined it as a political ideology. Notice it's political, not religious. It is a political ideology that seeks to merge Christian and American identities. So it distorts both our faith and our constitutional democracy. It says that our country has always been Christian, which again, I argue it has not. And we have documents and we have writings that prove that. And it aims to keep it that way or make it that way now. And most importantly, it privileges the Christian faith, and it implies that to be a good American, you have to be Christian. More so, you have to be a very specific type of Christian. And so that's what we are pushing back against. We're not saying that you can't be religious. We're not saying religion is bad. We aren't saying that there isn't a place in our legislators to have faith. We have a lot of people who show up from the well, from on the floor in the House and the Senate, and they are carrying their faith with them. That's fine. Don't impose it on me. Don't impose it on my children. Don't impose it on my community. And that's what we're fighting against. Anything to add? Does that kind of give you the basis for what we're talking about here? Enough of an answer for you, sir? Yeah, another question.
If that's the case, wouldn't that be also true for the Second Amendment? I mean,
Ooh.
if they're arguing.
Ooh, bringing the heat here. Do you want to answer that one?
I do not. It is not an issue area that mainstream weighs in on. So I hear what you're saying. I don't feel comfortable answering that just because we do have organizations like Grandparents for Gun Safety that.
And Moms Demand.
And Moms Demand, sorry.
I know we have a strong Moms Demand in the audience,
Okay,
so
so-
gotta call it out.
Grandparents and moms, that fight for, safe gun use and, would be better answering that question than we would.
But I mean, on the other side, if that's the argument for guns, then
Yes, and that could, yes, so if that's the argument for, if the other side, so I guess if the conservative side, if this is our argument for guns, freedom, liberty, then, why doesn't that?
contradiction, right? It is a contradiction.
Right, it could be considered a contradiction, and that can extrapolate to any issue that we're talking about here today. That there's a contradiction in, reasoning.
Well, and I'll say that's kind of a hallmark move of extremists. They don't care about the contradiction. They believe what they believe.
And everyone else has to believe that too.
Exactly.
So the last thing that I want to kind of define for us is the leading piece of statute law at the federal level, which is the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, or RFRA. That was passed back in 1993, and it was intended to protect individual religious rights, and specifically minority religious rights. And so it was a bipartisan piece of legislation, passed really well, and then it got ugly. Over the years, we have seen people, extremists, use RFRA as a way to justify discrimination and hate. And so on the page in your toolkit that lists some of the Supreme Court rulings, you'll see after 1993 in the early 2000s, that's what's happening. We have companies saying, I don't want to provide birth control. I don't want to make cakes for gay couples because it violates my religious freedom, and RFRA protects me. That was never the intent of this bill. That was never the intent of the law of the land, to protect corporations' business interests and to permit discrimination against minority populations. Religion is not meant to be a shield to do whatever you want. But unfortunately, that's where our courts have headed. That's what we're seeing being abused in our state house. Honestly, we're seeing it at the local level. We're seeing it everywhere. And so there has been a bill introduced over the past several Congresses to try and amend that, the Do No Harm Act. It is trying to get us back to the original intent of RFRA, to protect minority religious rights and individual freedoms, not allow discrimination. That Do No Harm Act has not gone anywhere. It'll have to be reintroduced. But that is something that we definitely want to see passed at the federal level. And we'd love to see something like that here at the state level so that we can make sure that religious freedoms are being respected in the way that is intended.
We are working on that.
We are. Let's pause there, check in on questions, because the next thing we're going to talk about is a little bit more action oriented and what you can be doing. And we're going to talk about messaging. So how are we feeling about kind of this information about religious freedom, the way that we're defining it, the way that we're advocating for it, and separation of church state in our state house work? Any concerns, any questions? Anybody kind of feeling iffy about kind of this information? Is it sitting right with you? Still feeling a little unsure?
No, but I see that it's only applicable to the federal government, not the state, and so therefore the state can do anything they want.
That's an excellent point. So in the audience, we said, RFRA is only applicable at the federal level. That is true. It was originally, I think, intended for the states, but then the Supreme Court said, no, this is just a federal, item. So states passed their own. And Kansas does have their own Religious Freedom Act that was passed, remind me, 2013. And we've seen about half the states pass their own, including 2 states that just passed them in 23, I believe, as a
Is that
result
in
of
here?
COVID.
Did you-
That's not in here. The Kansas is named here, the Preservation of Religious Freedom Act passed in 2013. We can share out that actual statute language so you can read that. So we'll make sure that we get that in our follow-up. But yes, so our state does have our own version. And lots of states do, and states that are passing them now are doing so because they were anxious and angry about churches being forced to close during COVID. And so there's a new round of state level RFRAs being passed right now. I don't know, we partner really well with Americans United for Separation of Church and State, or AU. And so we were just on a call with them last week where they kind of gave us a little bit of information about what to expect. We'll talk about that later. And told us that that's a trend that they saw in a couple of years ago, but not quite sure where we're going to see that go in the next couple of years nationally.
Is AU mentioned in here?
AU is, at one point I had it in the toolkit. I don't know if it got cut.
I'm quite familiar with it, but I think everybody ought to be.
They're a fantastic organization. We had their CEO and president come out last year for our breakfast and do our keynote speech. And we plan on trying to get them here in Kansas as much as possible. They're a fantastic organization.
And a really great partner as well.
We'll make sure y'all have the link to their website and how to contact them if you want to as well. Sorry.
Give them a call.
All right, so I'm trying to keep us on time.
We are, by the way, we are on.
We're not bad. All right, let's talk about messaging because it definitely is easy to get co-opted when we talk about religious freedom. And so when we encourage you all to talk to your legislators, to talk to your fellow advocates about church-state separation and centering that in part of your work, we want to make sure that you feel confident in how to talk about it. So on page 7 of the toolkit, or this one right here, for those in the room, oh, Michael's holding it up. You're such a good man, all right. We have some suggestions for how to message. Michael, do you want to kind of kick this off?
Well, and we spoke about this a little bit earlier. When we were talking about testimony, the first piece or the first point or first rule of messaging is be authentic, right? And you don't have to be the expert. Tell your story. If you're a person of faith, center your faith. If you're not a person of faith, don't make it up. Center your experience, right? I'm a person of nominal faith. The word Christian, just like the word religious freedom is kind of cringy for some people, the word Christian, for whatever reason, is cringy for me. And it's because of the connotations that have been put onto it. It shouldn't be that way, right? But it's because of the connotations that have been put onto it by the extremists. It's because of people who are claiming to be that and then do harm to other people. So be very careful in messaging, be very authentic in messaging. When you do so. And so Laurel's laid out in here some specific church-state separation messaging that you could use when contacting your legislators or any of your elected representatives. And it's, everywhere from social media, emails. You can see here the first thing is it's the foundation of our country. Church-state separation is literally the foundation of our country. It is one of the main reasons that they came over here, was so they could worship how they chose to worship or not worship at all. There's points in here for being a person of faith. There's points in here for not being a person of faith. And it talks a little bit about Christian nationalism. For the sake of time, I'm not going to read each one of those for you. you can, and we do have additional messaging around we will have additional messaging around specific bills when you receive those alerts, and when you receive those action alerts to talk to your legislator, submit testimony, go to a council meeting, go to the Board of County Commissioners. We have a question from Zoom.
One thing I don't appreciate with Christian evangelicals is proselytizing. How are we different? We aren't advocating a specific view, ? That comes from Catherine Bales.
All right, thanks, Catherine. The question from Zoom was, one thing that is not appreciated by Catherine with Christian nationalists is the proselytizing, right? Trying to aggressively bring one into your religion and make them believe the way you believe. How are we any different in spreading our message, right? And advocating for our beliefs? We are not advocating for a specific religion, as Catherine then answered her own question, but we are advocating for freedom for all people, which is very different than proselytizing. It's basic human dignity. All right.
And I do want to kind of stress this, if you're a person of faith, lead with your faith here. Michael and I have had a lot of conversations about who should be centered in this work. I myself am a non-believer, and I want to be in front saying, this is how it impacts me. This is how it impacts my children. And I will be, but they're not going to listen to me. And so I need allyship. I need folks who are Christian, who might be the kind of person who aligns with some of the things spiritually or religiously that Christian nationalists believe in, not politically. But I need you saying, hey, this is not what I want. You're not representing me. You're not representing my faith. You're not representing what I want for my country as a person of faith, because that's going to carry much more weight. And so if you are comfortable leading with your faith, if you are a person of faith, we need you. We need you talking really loud about how you want separation of church and state. You want that wall, and you want Christian nationalism to die. We don't want it here. Horrible, painful death. Nationalism, not nationalist.
Right.
The ideology. Okay, so I do just kind of want to talk about a couple things that we've got coming our way, but messaging is a really hard thing, and we threw it in your lap in 5 minutes and said, okay, now go out and speak. So I just want to check in and see how people are feeling about talking about this, about the messaging that we've shared. These are drafts. These are things that templates, I should say. You take them, you make them your own. You can ignore them completely. They're examples. Don't ignore them completely.
Well, and also to your point, Laurel, we gave this all to you in 5 minutes. This is not supposed to be a deep dive, right? We are going to continue to hold trainings. We're going to continue to push out information and help you be as engaged and informed as possible, especially throughout the legislative session, but all year round. So this is not the last you've seen of or heard of messaging. This is just your introduction to.
And so I guess if you have questions, if you want to talk about it more, reach out to us, because we're definitely willing to do that and happy to do that and want to do that, because we want you to be comfortable. So in the next couple minutes before we take a break, and hopefully we still have coffee and donuts in the back, why are we giving you messaging right now? What do we expect to be coming our way that we might need you to speak very specifically about separation of church and state? Nationally, we're seeing some pretty troubling trends. And I think a lot of it is because of the new federal administration coming in. A lot of it is because supermajorities like we have in Kansas are in other states. And we're seeing that Christian nationalism just creep in everywhere. But so far, just in this new legislative session, states have been introducing bills that mandate the 10 Commandments in classrooms.
Oh.
So we have 10 states already since November of 24, I believe, who have introduced legislation on that. You would not be surprised. Those states include Missouri, Kentucky, Texas, Oklahoma, Montana, Tennessee, South Carolina, South Dakota, North Dakota, Indiana. It's coming our way. So, question about that?
Well, I guess the point, if you were a legislator and you saw what happens when Oklahoma has got to put a religious education into the schools, why would you want to get into that mess? Why would you put your foot in there? Because the different Christian denominations will certainly have a different reading of the Bible. And if your school is going to teach the Bible, anybody who studied it is gonna find, ooh, it's not really a consistent document.
Yeah, so the question in the room is why on earth do legislators want to introduce this kind of legislation that mandates Bibles or religious documents in the classroom when there's so many, and there's going to be arguments about what should be included there. I mean, the 10 Commandments, there's not one single 10 Commandments that everybody agrees on, right? So yes, prayers, all of it, there's variations. And even within the Christian faith, there's variations that people feel very strongly about. I don't know. I don't know why they want to do that.
To be very blunt, Christian nationalism, the ideology, while it has the name Christian in it, is a political ideology. It is about power.
Yeah.
Bottom line, votes, power, votes, money. This is what it's been about for the last 40 years as they've been ramping up. It's just now known today as Christian nationalism. It's about power, gaining that power, keeping that power, having all of the pie, right? Every piece of pie. That's why I believe these legislators would want to weigh in, because mandating one religion over another is power. It gives power to a certain group of people, and it takes power away from others.
It's picking winners and losers. Absolutely. Dr. Bob, in his sermon that Mainstream was kind of founded on, he called them the religious right. Christian nationalist is a newer term, but it's been around forever.
Moral majority, religious right, Christian nationalist, now even more political and even more militia-like. I think we have a Zoom question.
Never mind.
Okay, thank you.
I'd like to just quickly go through the other things we see coming our way, and then I think I saw another hand in the room. So in line with that, we also see several states that have introduced mandatory prayer. Kentucky and Texas, again, I don't think we're surprised to hear some of these states. And then Texas is having an interesting fight right now with curriculum and requiring very specific religious curriculum in the classrooms. The good news is that with the exception of the 10 Commandments, these are optional. School boards have to opt into these things like the curriculum. And we're seeing school districts not do that. So one area that has come to Kansas but did not make it very far is the volunteer chaplain bill. We've seen that passed in several states, started in Texas. It basically says that chaplains can be volunteers in schools. They can already be volunteers in schools. There's nothing that prevents them. It's just a signal for the Christian nationalists that we are trying to insert religion in schools again. And so Texas had their bill pass 2 years ago, I believe. And again, it wasn't mandatory. It was an opt-in. One school district opted in, the rest said no. That's great. That's fantastic. When it was introduced in Kansas last year, similar language, it was optional. It did not make it out of committee. There was a hearing. It didn't make it out of committee. It was pretty quiet. We're hearing from our friends at AU that the next round may make it mandatory. And so they're not stopping this bill. Like, they're not satisfied with having it pass in Texas and in Florida and in other places. It probably will come back to Kansas in some form or another. Again, it's one of those things that feels harmless. Why wouldn't we be okay with chaplains in schools? Again, it's power. It's the way that they are putting it in a mandatory way that violates the pluralism of religious experience in our schools. So those are kind of the things we're following. Those are the 4 areas that we've seen introduced. Elsewhere, the chaplain bill is the only one that's made it to Kansas so far, but these are very specific church-state separation bills that we don't usually see in Kansas. That's why this messaging exists, and that's why we're asking you to be prepared for very targeted ways of talking about this. Question on Zoom.
Judy asks, is there a Topeka Advocacy Day centered on separation of church and state?
There is not currently. We would be the ones to do that. We have talked about it. And it's something that we would like to do. We don't have a date set yet. In part because, like I said, these bills haven't really come here yet. So stay tuned, I would say.
Let's not give them any ideas.
Partly, yes, let's not give them any ideas. They've got the ideas. Other questions in the room before we break?
Oh,
Oh,
quickly, but on that topic about, lobby days. Will there be a lobby day or an advocacy day around church-state separation and religious freedom? No, but we will be asking you to talk to your legislators about that. So make that personal connection with your legislators, however you communicate with them, and talk about why church-state separation and religious freedom is important in Kansas.
another question.
Does it do any good to send a postcard to representatives or senators outside your own district?
Sorry, I shouldn't say anything.
So my question was, does it help at all to send postcards to legislators outside of your district?
Yeah.
They only tend to listen to their constituents because they're the ones who vote for them. If you have a substantial interest in their district, if you work for a company in their district, there might be an argument that you have some kind of voice there, but for the most part, no.
If you don't vote in their district, they generally don't listen.
Aaron, did I see you raise your hand in relation to that?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, sometimes I think what I've done, especially when we've had like a bill, and we're activating people to contact their legislators. A lot of times I tell people to copy leadership on it, so Time Masterson, whoever, the Senate president, and then the minority leader as well in both chambers, because then they can kind of see the pressure, this is my theory. They can see the pressure that's being put on some of their legislators, especially if they're getting a large volume, so that might help.
For those on Zoom, that was Erin, who you'll see in our panel here in a little bit from sixth grade, saying that her work, she also copies leadership in the House and the Senate when she sends in messages so that they can see that as well. Did I see another hand over here? Yeah.
Probably along the same lines, so, is it also helpful though to still email or talk to your representatives, even if you know that they're on the same page as you are?
So is it helpful to talk to your
Help
legislators?
them?
Is it helpful to talk to legislators who are on the same page, who are friendly legislators? Yeah, absolutely. Not nearly as much importance there in terms of swaying them, but giving them the reassurance that yes, you have constituents in your district who support this. And building that relationship with friendlies is always important because there are times when they have relationships in the state house with people across the aisle or across the issue. And they can leverage those relationships and they can have better conversations than we can. So build a relationship, give them kind of this information about how important church-state separation is to you, because it gives them leverage, it gives them information that they can then use in their relationships. I think it's absolutely helpful.
On Zoom, Frida says, I think that if you're a Christian, it is important to let legislators know that they need to know that this is an important issue to Christians. Christian nationalism is bad policy for churches as well as unbelievers.
So comment on Zoom that if you're a Christian, it's important to say this, Christian nationalism is bad for churches just as much as it is for non-believers. Yes. Full stop. Yes. Thank you. Okay, are we good for a break?
Yes.
Yes, okay. For those in the room, bathrooms are out and to the left, we have coffee and hot water for tea, hopefully, and donuts, hopefully. We'll reconvene in about 5 minutes, so. Okay, we're gonna give 10. So we'll come back at 11:05. Thank you. All right, welcome back, everyone. Thank you. We're going to now spend a little bit of time talking to amazing people who are really incredible advocates in the State House and our communities, leveraging their online resources and communities. So I am thrilled that we're able to host a couple of folks up here. I'll let you introduce yourselves in a second. But I do just want to kind of bring this all back home for us and talk about how church-state separation and mainstream support advocacy in issue areas that we've been doing for years and that we know are going to come up again this year. So that's the point of this panel, is just to make it a little bit more real for us and tangible. Let me go ahead and have our panel introduce themselves. Make it real, make it tangible, scare us a little bit, because, I mean, I'm already scared. They're like, no problem. All right, and fortunately, like, I've worked with each one of you ladies in the State House in some way or another, and you guys just amaze me every day, so thank you for taking the time. Monday's the start of session, and yet you're here with us, so thank you. Erin, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, your name, your org, kind of what you do?
Hi, yes, my name's Erin Woods, and I started a little grassroots organization called 6 Degrees of Activism. And essentially I have a newsletter, which is probably my main way of communicating with people. But essentially try to pull people together to get people informed on what's happening in the legislature and get them engaged in, you know, much like what we've been talking about, they've been talking about all day, is contacting your legislators. And my main goal in it was to make things as easy as possible, which essentially, I never saw myself in this world. I don't quite know how I ended up here, but I was compelled to do it, I guess. But it all started for me with the ACA when they were trying to overturn that back in 2017. And I realized I better contact my legislators, and who are they and what do I say? So I realized that was all kind of hard for me to figure out. I was nervous about it all. So I just started contacting friends and to let them know what was going on and encouraging them to reach out as well. And tried to make that as easy as possible for them. Showed them where to go to find their legislators. Share them an example of what they could say and things like that. So that's just been my goal from the start, and it's just sort of grown. I guess I have maybe 1,800 subscribers at this point. And anyways, that's me.
Hi, my name is Taryn Jones. I am the policy director and lobbyist for Equality Kansas. So we are a grassroots organization that started 20 years ago. It was a forming of a bunch of smaller different organizations within the state working on LGBTQ issues. And so this opportunity to lobby just kind of fell in my lap. I'm definitely still learning, but I work in the State House lobbying mostly, unfortunately, against LGBTQ bills. And I think of anything else I should do. I think that's it. Yeah. So I'm in the State House a lot during legislative sessions. So if you're ever there, come find me, say hello.
Hi, my name is Taylor Morton. I'm from Planned Parenthood Great Plains Votes. I am the Kansas lobbyist and policy analyst, so I oversee all of our direct lobbying at the Kansas legislature, as well as our organizing, grassroots organizing in the state. And I also have a role in organizing in Missouri for Planned Parenthood. So I'm under the dome a lot at the State House. And we all run into each other. We run in the same circles. But yeah, so I, give direct testimony in committee, usually against anti-abortion, anti-reproductive health legislation, as well as, like I said, leading a lot of our organizing work and helping uplift, community leaders like yourself who are interested in getting more involved in the legislature. So glad to be here.
I'll just say really quickly, I didn't really mention, so I kind of touch on all kinds of issues from reproductive rights to LGBTQ rights, voting rights, etc. But I'm like kind of here today on public education. That is probably the issue that I feel the most versed in when I want to share information about LGBTQ rights and what's happening in the state legislature. I reach out to Taryn, and so that's one thing, is utilize all your resources. But
yeah, thank you for that. I was just going to call out. So we have public education, LGBTQ plus equality, and reproductive health care kind of represented here. But there are so many times when I see all three of you and your organizations partnering together to stop one bad bill. Like, it overlaps so much. And there's a lot of really great organizations under the dome advocating, but it still feels like a very small world. And so we'll see the same people over and over again showing up and trying to stop these bad extremist bills. So thank you again for all that you do, all that you're going to be doing this year. We know bad things happening in public education with equality, with reproductive health care. Tie it to church-state separation for me a little bit here. How do those issues directly connect with what we've been talking about in the room? And specifically kind of what we're seeing as the advancement of Christian nationalism? And then if you have some examples of things that we've seen in Kansas historically, could you kind of illustrate that for us? You want to start, Erin, with public ed?
Yes, there are quite a lot of ties, but I mean, as far as like things that have happened, I mean, I don't know if many of you remember back in the late nineties to early 2000s, our state board of education kind of flipped to an extremist majority. And here in Kansas, they actually removed evolution from the curriculum and started promoting creationism. So that's a big example of what could happen again. Hopefully not, but it is our state boards that set the curriculum standards, and our local boards then are the ones who will look at the various curriculum and decide, you know, which curriculum to go with. But that is kind of a risk that we face, because in that case, the board eventually flipped back to more traditional board members who support public schools and have education backgrounds. But this past November, I don't know how many people are aware, but our state board of education flipped to an extremist majority again. So that's the first time we've had that happen since that time. So there's a 6-4 majority. So some things that, you know, we're kind of concerned about, or are we going to see things like we're seeing in Oklahoma and or Florida? You know, they could kind of start pushing book bans or promoting religion in schools, as has already been talked about. Or then also, you know, Florida, the kind of the Don't Say Gay bills that they passed. I mean, the State Board of Education doesn't pass bills, but again, anything that kind of hits curriculum, they will set those standards, and just having a board that is for those things and not fighting against the legislature to stop those things is problematic as well. And they also can pick a new Department of Ed leader there, and that could be, you know, look at Oklahoma and who leads that. So right now that is not the case. We have a very public education focused. I'm trying to think, I've lost the commissioner. So anyways, those are some concerns we kind of have there. And then I should touch upon, and then really vouchers in general, those are they're always pushing vouchers in the state, and we're very concerned about this year, but those send our public tax dollars to private and religious schools. So we, you know, those schools then can reject any students they want if they don't follow that particular religion, if they have same-sex parents. We've seen that here in Johnson County, but sending our tax dollars to those public schools that might promote those values are, I don't think, what the majority of Kansans would want,
So with equality, there's obviously a lot of overlap with education, kind of like Erin was saying with the Don't Say Gay bills that are coming around. Also, I know there have been school districts where trans children aren't allowed to go by their preferred name. We've also had a lot of issues with trans healthcare. That's a bill that we've been fighting for 4 or 5 years now. A lot of the Christian nationalism, I think, and the involvement with LGBTQ started back in 2004 when Kansas created the Marriage Act. I can't remember. Do you remember what that's called? I can't remember off the top. I can't remember. Anyway, it bans marriage, but that's anything besides a man and a woman. And now that there's a federal law for that has obviously been, it's not been removed, unfortunately. It's still there, but it obviously is rendered useless. So that's one thing that we've been fighting against since 2004, basically, is to get that taken off the books. Now that they really can't even use the law, and that's something we've been unsuccessful with. Like I said, gender affirming care has been a big one. There's been a lot of issues with that. In our schools, the sports ban, the trans sports ban has been a large issue. And so unfortunately that passed the Oh my gosh, I'm losing my mind. I'm sorry. I'll come up here and everything is blank. Um, the Women's Bill of Rights was a big one 2 years ago. And that basically defined sexes by, whether you're male or female, and it creates a lot of issues for people who are not only transgender, but also people who are, what is the word for that?
Non-binary?
No.
Intersect?
Yes, thank you, intersex. Sorry, guys.
I know you know all this.
I know, I'm like, I know everything about all this, and then I get up here and my mind just
What
goes.
does that mean?
So intersex is basically where you're born, with basically, you're not born male or female, you have some overlap, so you might be presenting as one way and have like an XY chromosome, or you might have internal, like if you're presenting as a man, you might have ovaries, or you might have things like that that are,
XXY.
yeah, XY, yeah, sorry.
XXY.
Yeah, XXY.
That's right.
So that's basically what that is. And so we've had a lot of issues over the past, 20 years trying to fight all of these things. And a lot of it has had to do with religious freedom bills and just religious freedom in general.
Yeah, and in the context of reproductive rights and reproductive health care, I don't think I'm surprising anyone when I say that the rising Christian nationalism and religious extremism is really deeply tied to these issues. And, we see this every legislative session in Kansas, but, in the years since the fall of Roe, the DOT decision in 2022, it's gotten especially amped, I would say in a way, but we see this rise in Christian nationalism, both at the grassroots level, with anti-abortion movement, but also in our legislature. And, we know that just statistically speaking, there's been ample polling done that, Kansans support abortion access. We proved it on August 2nd, 2022, when we defeated an anti-abortion constitutional amendment. And like I said, there's been public opinion polling in the years since. And these are Kansans of all kinds of faith denominations. We know that at its core, abortion access, reproductive rights are not implicitly or explicitly religious issues. Abortion is healthcare, contraception is healthcare, reproductive healthcare is healthcare. But, when we see the increasing politicization of these issues, and explicitly and implicitly religious and, Christian nationalist arguments being made in the legislature to promote these anti-abortion bills, it, really makes you question, why is this happening? So it's great that events like this are happening, to really talk about it, because, going against the will of the people aside, there shouldn't be one religious ideology, one, minority Christian religious ideology that's represented in our laws. That goes against the core of our Constitution. And we've seen, like I said, so many anti-abortion bills be introduced and passed in Kansas. But something that really comes to mind in the context of, the Christian nationalism is, state funding for what are called anti-abortion crisis pregnancy centers. Crisis pregnancy centers, CPCs, as they're often called, are nonprofit organizations that present themselves as legitimate healthcare facilities, but really exist with the express purpose of dissuading pregnant people from seeking abortion care. They are widely deemed unethical by organizations like the AMA and the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists. They are not held to the same regulatory standards as other health centers, where you go to the doctor. There are obviously bureaucratic and important, metrics that they have to meet to be licensed to provide medical care. But regardless, suffice to say, if you want to talk more about CPCs, come see me. I can talk about it all day, as they know. But there have been several bills over the last couple of years to expressly give taxpayer money to these often explicitly religious organizations who, like I said, it just exists to dissuade folks from seeking abortion care. And that just to me is a very obvious example from Kansas. But if you really look behind the curtain of any anti-abortion legislation or really arguments, narratives out there in the space, you'll see sometimes expressly Christian nationalist views, oftentimes every time, implicitly Christian and religious centered views. And, again, just back to the point that Kansans of all different faith denominations support abortion access. We know that there are religious sects and, faith denominations that expressly support reproductive health care access and abortion access. And there's a really amazing history of religious activism for abortion access across the country. And so it's not fair, honestly, to, equate one very loud minority voice of, particular strain of Christianity to the broader, faith community in our state, and, how these communities feel and individuals feel about access to abortion. And we know the bottom line, my decision to make my own healthcare decisions, our right to make our own choices when it comes to what happens to our bodies. We can consult with our own faith leaders, we can consult with our medical providers, our families, to determine what decision is best for us. In no way does the government need to be in our exam rooms, and that is at the core of it. So I'll get off my soapbox now.
Now, and I apologize, just having one mic makes this a little awkward. I'm gonna hand it back to you in a second, Taylor. But thank you for that. And I just wanna stress that this is all very out loud. Like, there's no behind the scenes talk about oh, we gotta insert religion in our schools. They're saying this out loud. They're quoting the Bible on the floor, on the chambers. They're absolutely being very bold in saying that this is the reason why we don't want abortion access in our state. This is the reason why we want vouchers so people can go to religious schools. This is the reason why we want to stop care for transgender youth. It's based on our religion. It's based on how we interpret the Bible. So it's not like this is nuanced. They're saying it out loud. I think that we probably don't need to spend a ton of time on this because it's, I think, fairly obvious after the conversations we've had so far. And because we have stopped a lot of bad bills in the past, they're going to be back. But what is the kind of biggest thing that you're expecting in your issue area this year? I'm going to start with Taylor.
Yes. So in the last couple of years, since the August 2nd vote in 2022, it was a very overwhelming margin by which this anti-abortion constitutional amendment was defeated. We were the first state after the fall of Roe to vote on such a thing. I'm very proud of that. Go Kansas. But we've seen a lot of what I call backdoor policies attempting to restrict and stigmatize abortion care. There have been outright bans on abortion introduced, but they really haven't seen a lot of movement. So it really is looking like in 2025, we're going to see more of those kind of backdoor policies that, either directly restrict abortion access, further requirements before you're able to get an appointment, what have you, or, bills that stigmatize abortion. So last session, there was a bill that created the crime of coercion to obtain an abortion, not something that's really in practice super enforceable. And there was even a conversation about expanding the language to be all forms of reproductive coercion, tampering with someone's birth control, forcing someone to carry a pregnancy to term. There's a million ways that is something that is an umbrella term that, happens and is problematic, but it was specifically abortion that they wanted to stigmatize in this context. And so I think, like I said, those backdoor kind of policies that, increase bureaucratic challenges and burdens for providers, things like that. I think there will be an abortion ban bill introduced, but again, the appetite for that to move is less so because they know on some level that they're going against the will of the people in our state. I also think we're going to see more attempts to direct that or provide that direct taxpayer money to the crisis pregnancy centers. And also, attempts to further codify what's called fetal personhood language into Kansas law. So fetal personhood refers to the idea that, life begins at conception. So attempts to further, enforce that and codify it into Kansas law, I think is something we're going to see a lot of, as well as a tax on gender affirming care, which I'll let Taryn talk more about. Yeah.
So that was a good segue because gender affirming care is the #1 thing that we're going to be focusing on this year with Equality Kansas. We've managed to stop this bill every year for 4 years. And there's definitely the appetite there for that from the legislature because they've lost that over and over again. So we're definitely expecting that to come back. Also, last year they had a bill that didn't really go out of committee about non-discrimination ordinances. So if you weren't aware, non-discrimination ordinances, there's many around the state. Johnson County, except for I think Gardner, Edgerton, and DeSoto, all have non-discrimination ordinances for LGBTQ individuals. And I believe that it protects, non-discrimination ordinances protect about 50% of the state at this point. And so basically what this bill would do is make it illegal for non-discrimination ordinances to be, so all the protections that we have for 50% of the state would be gone. You know, it's hard to say what else they would do because unfortunately, gender affirming care is the only thing we've really held off on. You know, we lost the sports bill, the Women's Bill of Rights. I can see potentially having something like the Don't Say Gay bills or the just bills about there's already school districts that are having bills regarding not using your pronouns and your correct gender. So I can see how potentially that could become an issue. I think it's going to depend just on what their appetite is. The session this year is extremely short. It ends in April, which is very unusual. Usually our veto session ends like at the beginning of May. So I think it's really going to be a question of how much they're going to be able to kind of fit into the legislative session. But I definitely expect to see gender affirming care come up.
Can you tell us what all gender affirming care means? Because I'm sure some of us don't know that.
Yeah, so gender affirming care encompasses a lot. It encompasses anything from surgery, which is very, very rare on minors. And I should say these bills right now for gender affirming care are all for minors. I didn't say that earlier, but this is all only minors under 18. It also includes hormone blockers. So hormone blockers are used for gender affirming care, but they're also used for kids who have something called precocious puberty, which basically just means you start your puberty early. And so what the medication does is it basically stops your puberty until, you know, in the case of that, you're old enough to do that. And in the case of gender affirming care, you are able to go on hormones. So that's something that they could do. Also hormones, that's another one. So those are that's kind of what gender affirming care encompasses, is like hormones, surgery, which again is very rare under 18, and puberty blockers. Yeah.
Thank you.
Just real quick, does that also sometimes include, like therapy would they ever block that?
So social transition, yes, that could be something else that they block is social transition. That I don't know that there's as much appetite for that, but like, you know, the super majority increased, so never say never. But social transitioning is definitely something that also could come up in a gender affirming care ban.
And something about, Taryn said it perfectly, but I just wanted to add that last year, the gender affirming care ban bill for patients under age 18, the language was so broad that it could include, like, it could be interpreted to include a myriad of things that the precedent just would be dangerous in terms of how broad the language is to like include social transitioning or therapy or, you know, using someone's proper pronouns, etc. Like just emphasizing that the bill's language was really broad last session, and that could very well happen again this year.
Oh, yeah, I think there was something in one of the bills for penalties for school administrators or teachers. So I recall like there being therapists and teachers who were really uncomfortable and worried about the bill because of how, you know, something that they could say or do that would, you know, put them in harm's way or something. So, okay, education. I'm not excited about this session at all. It's going to take up a lot of time for a lot of education advocates and things. I think we really wanted to to break that supermajority because we're tired. So that means we need a lot more people in helping us out and engaged and informed. So just some things we're expecting. The one big one we're always worried about would be expansive voucher programs. They've tried it a couple of different times, and in 2023, I should say real quick, we do have a voucher program in Kansas. It's a small one. It was, as like many things, it was introduced in the middle of the night on the last day of a session, and that's how it got through. That's how they like to do a lot of things. And so what we see with those voucher programs here in Kansas, we've seen it and in other states, is once they're introduced, they kind of take hold, and then they try to expand them over and over until they're quite large. So far in Kansas, we've had, that program has been expanded a little bit, but it's still manageable and it's okay for the moment. But we do have that one that's always lurking and can be expanded. In 2023, they did their biggest push for something called education savings accounts. And those are where families can get so our school finance formula basically has part of it, the main part of it is about $5,000 per student goes to the public schools. So each school that's enrolled. So in this case with education savings accounts, they will give that $5,000 to be put in account for any child. You could attend homeschool, you can attend a private school, religious school, it didn't matter. You'd have that money there for you every year. So they really tried to push that. And the reason we don't, that's diverting our taxpayer dollars, not only to these private and religious schools, but that's just a whole nother, that's another expense to our state that we aren't carrying right now. What we're seeing in other states is about 70% of the kids who use these education and savings accounts were already attending private school. They've never attended a public school. So that's just a whole new expense for our state. And that's going to put public school funding at risk, along with the other problems with vouchers, like I mentioned earlier, that it's really, they talk about school choice, but when it comes down to it, it's not the choice for the parents or the students. It's a choice for those private schools. They can pick and choose which kids they want to let in. So sometimes you might hear about a school that, they're performing great or whatever their students are. Well, they're able to pick and choose. They have admissions exams, or, and like we talked about before, there's all sorts of different reasons they can not pick a child to admit in their school. And they can also counsel children out who aren't performing well. So there's a lot of issues with vouchers, and because they've grown the supermajority, we just expect that they'll probably try it again. But on top of that, there is an organization called ALEC, and okay, well, hopefully many of you know. I always have the hardest time remembering exactly what it stands for, but American Legislative, I won't even try. But anyways, I should know that. But they are a national group, kind of a far-right think tank that they come up with a lot of bills. You'll see the exact same bills in different states at the same time. But one of their big pushes is to privatize schools. And it just turns out that our Senate majority, or our Senate president, is a chairman of ALEC. So, and they have a map that they've shown the different states where they have expanded, they have gotten these education savings accounts through, and then they have the maps where which states they're targeting, and Kansas is a target for 2025. So this is probably one of the main things we're concerned about. And then we also have to worry about the school finance formula that we have now. Our current school finance formula came out of a court case because our schools were not being constitutionally funded. So the courts told the state, you need to start funding our schools, and they had to come up with a formula to do that, and it had to be equitable so that all schools are kind of getting a good amount of money. So we have at-risk funding in our formula. We have that base state aid per child, like I talked about, but then there's different things that get added on. Anyways, the courts approved the current school finance formula as adequate and equitable. But we are hearing leadership, talking that they might want to make some changes, and we don't trust that those changes will be good changes. So that, formula expires in 2027, and they've already started a committee to look at that. Don't think it's a very balanced committee, but that's another concern. So we really just think that formula that has been approved by our courts needs to just be renewed and not messed with. It's been working pretty well. So that's kind of that issue we need to be watching for. And then just tax cuts. You know, tax cuts always sound great, but they have a tendency to get a little reckless with them. And the tax cuts, we've seen what happens in our state is that one of the first things that gets cut if, our state went in the red under the Brownback tax experiment, and our public education budgets were cut drastically. In fact, that court case that's called Gannon, if you've ever heard of it, want to know what it's called, but you might hear people refer to it. Really just last school year was the first year that our schools, that funding from all of those cuts was finally restored. The courts, through that, we had a phase in of that funding. So we finally reached that point. And I'll touch on, I didn't have this on there because I don't know that we have much hope for getting it, but even though we have general education has reached that full funding point, based upon that court case, the state has not been fully funding special education. At the time that court case was out there, special education was fully funded. So it was not part of Gannon. So over the years, they've just slowly, that gap in funding has grown. So what happens with our school districts is special education funding it's mandated. They have to provide those services and fund that. So our school districts have been shifting millions of dollars, especially the larger districts, from their operating budgets that could be used for all kinds of things to help students learn, all students learn, but they have to shift that over to cover the special education budget. So those general operating budgets are basically have cuts to them. So we really want them to fully fund special education, but I don't think there's a chance of that. And so really correctly, so reckless tax cuts we need to watch for, and then that State Board of Education is a thing we need to watch what they're doing this year. Sorry.
So one thing, Aaron brought up a good point with school vouchers. That's something that also affects our LGBTQ community. I don't know if this is something that's necessarily happened in Kansas, but a lot of schools that are doing school voucher programs, or even not doing school voucher programs, kids will go into private schools, and because their parents are gay, or because they're gay or trans, or they'll kick them out. And so basically with school vouchers, what is happening is our public money is funneling into something that discriminates against people. And so that's a real issue. And I think one thing to think about, the reason that we all three see each other so much is because our issues overlap so much. Like when we're talking about LGBTQ equality, like that's kind of the gender affirming care ban is kind of under the same umbrella that you do with, bodily autonomy. And when we're talking about education, like school vouchers are a big thing, and also the sports ban that we had. And so it's important to remember that like everything kind of overlaps. And I am so lucky because I feel like we all here, up here, and others have such a good relationship working together and fighting for bills that are maybe not specifically LGBTQ or specifically education, but that kind of overlap.
Thank you for drawing that line for us. And we unfortunately only have just like a minute or two left. So we're not gonna be able to do audience Q&A. I will, if the panel is comfortable, I can share contact information in my follow-up. So if you have questions, you can reach out, because I know we just, again, dumped a lot of information at you. But one thing I want to point out, notice the trend that Christian nationalists are really obsessed with women and children, and especially their bodies. So that's something to watch out for as we move forward. Okay, 1 minute or less for each of you. What can we do to help you? How do we show up? We've talked about earlier today, showing up where we can, being loud, bringing a friend. What else can we do to help you?
be informed on all these, try to inform yourself on all these issues, or sometimes it's hard to focus on so many. If you have one that you're particularly important with, find the resources to learn about those. So for education in particular, follow Game On for Kansas Schools on Facebook or Instagram or X. They're kind of out there everywhere. Kansas Association of School Boards is another one on Facebook. They have a lot of good information. Education First Shawnee Mission for the Shawnee Mission area, Stand Up Blue Valley. You can sign up for my 6 Degrees of Activism newsletter. I will, you guys can, whatever.
We'll share it, yep.
Aaron 723 substack.com. It's, ugh. Anyways,
I went there.
sorry.
And it wasn't working.
Aaron, ERIN 723 substack.com. And I'll have them put that in
We'll
there.
send it out
Yeah.
and we'll make sure it's working.
Yeah.
So I think some of the stuff I had on here was already talked about today. You know, getting engaged with your legislators, that type of thing. Most important, talk to your friends. Become educated. You don't have to be an expert, but just kind of know what's going on and talk to other people and make sure they know what's going on. That's probably number one. And understanding, it was mentioned earlier that this is a long game. So even if, you know, some of these things that sound so awful, and if these bills pass, what we need to make sure of is that people know that they passed and people know what's happening in Topeka. Because as was mentioned, 2 years, we have, the biggest thing I'm worried about is the governor race. So many of these things with education that we've stopped in the past, if we don't have, I mean, I hate, you know, if we don't have a governor who believes in education, I'm very worried about the state of Kansas. So just getting people engaged and making sure that they know what's going on. I'm also going to promote, there is an event tomorrow with 3 excellent experts on vouchers. And I hopefully, maybe we'll just, I don't know if we can send it out or I can put it, so I know
We can try and get it out today.
it's out today because it's.
So, like Erin said, getting engaged, showing up, if you're able to come to Topeka, either to testify or just to kind of pack the room. One thing is having testimony, either written or oral. You don't have to testify up there in person. Helps kind of have numbers, strengthen numbers. One thing we were noticing, especially with like our bills with gender affirming care and the sports ban, was they'd had all these people who come from out of state to testify for the other side. And we will have, you know, you look at the roster of who testifies and there's just, our side is tons of people and they're all from within the state. And, you know, the other end of the spectrum has, you know, 3 people from out of state. So it's really important if you are able to, you know, written testimony or oral testimony. That's so important to kind of show that this really isn't an issue that Kansans want. Definitely talk to your friends, stay informed. We have a Facebook, Equality Kansas Facebook and Equality Kansas Twitter and X that we use, especially during the legislative session, to send out alerts about what's going on, to send out action items that we need people to do. We will have a website. It's under construction right now, but it will be eqks.org. So that should be up here within the next month. And that's kind of a way to stay informed.
Yeah, I definitely echo everything that Erin and Taryn have said, and just the importance of staying informed. We also have a weekly newsletter that we send out, really brief, via email during legislative session to just keep you updated on, okay, here are the bills that were introduced, here's how they're moving, here's how you can submit testimony, you know, click this link, find out who your legislators are. And like I said, just a really brief email with the main points you need to know. So that's something I'll get to Laurel so that if you are interested in signing up for that, you can. Definitely engage with your legislators, engage with the Capitol as much as you can if possible, and really emphasizing that talking to people you know piece, because you know there's a level of rapport we have with the people in our networks and our friends and our family and our book clubs and church groups and what have you. That's really how a lot of activism can happen and a lot of advocacy can happen, and it's really important. You know, it might seem small, but you know, somebody you're talking to already trusts you if they know you, you know. And you can also attend lobby days and events at the Capitol. You know, our organizations have events pretty regularly. The Planned Parenthood lobby day is on March 11th if you're interested and available. But yeah, you know, keep keep coming to things like this. And yeah, and if there's an issue area or, a question that you have about any of it, we all work really closely together and we're happy to help you out. Because the system and the processes are really confusing and kind of daunting at first, but that's on purpose. And it's awesome that you guys are here because I get very passionate talking about this, but it's intentionally kind of confusing. And so we're here to help you navigate those systems if you ever have questions, because they need to hear from you in order to make good decisions in office.
What happens on a lobby day?
So lobby day, essentially, it's sort of an all-day thing. Beginning of the morning, we'll get you breakfast, give you some training, couple of talking points. You'll have a packet of information of like, these are the bills we're looking at, and here's where your legislators' offices are. And then we just kind of spend the late morning and the afternoon, meeting with people, trying to have conversations with legislators. And there will be a big group out, able to do it. And then, for Planned Parenthood Lobby Day, Planned Parenthood staff will be there to be able to help if you have questions or whatnot, and we'll give you food. But it's great, and it's a good time to like meet other people who care about the issue areas that you're passionate about as well. And like all of our organizations, all the progressive advocacy organizations do some sort of lobby day or work together on lobby days. So yeah, so it's a good way to get involved, and especially if you haven't before, because we provide a lot of information for you.
So I will just add, Equality Kansas Lobby Day will be March 4th. We do kind of a little bit similar to Planned Parenthood. We have kind of a rally where we have speakers who are legislators, trans people, trans parents in the community. And then we go off and have people speak with legislators. So that is March 4th.
All right, and I just want to just stress one thing that I heard all three of you say about being informed. You would not believe how many people I've talked to after the election who said, I thought abortion was safeguarded here in Kansas. I thought we were safe. I thought public education was fully funded. I thought we didn't have to do anything about that. They just don't underestimate the level of knowledge, don't overestimate the level of knowledge that your friends have. We all need to be making sure that everybody has the same level of information about what is really happening and what is really at stake. So let me thank you all. Thank you so much. As you can tell, complete experts in their field. They know what they're doing. They know how to connect us to the information. And we are just so grateful to have you in Topeka and here with us today. Thank you. And so in order to try and get you out of here by noon, because they're going to kick us out of the room, so we have to be out of here. I'm going to have Michael come up. Michael, would you grab a couple of the postcards? Because we want to make sure that you all are leaving here with some resources that, and some action items that you can do immediately. So make sure that you've marked out those advocacy days, those lobby days. Make sure that you've put down the information for how to follow those organizations, how to follow us and get engaged. Because those are going to be your best resources. Yep, those are going to be your best resources for staying informed and staying active during this session. The toolkit, oh, sorry, what page? The very last page in your toolkit has additional resources that Mainstream has. So we have our KS Ledge lookup. I'm hoping that you all know who your state rep and senator are. If not, this is a great place to look by your address. Make sure your friends know about it. You can find out who your legislator is. Then you can see what their voting record has been like on the issues that Mainstream follows. We actually score them. The example in your book is Senate President Ty Masterson. He has a lifetime score, I believe, of 3. So he has voted along with Mainstream priorities over the years enough to get a score of 3. 3% of the time. So that's a really great resource. Make sure that you guys utilize that. And then we have our bill track system, which we call KS Ledge Watch. And we publish that every year. We update it with our testimony, our position on bills, where it's at in the process, and how you can take action. So that is linked on our Mainstream website, mainstreamcoalition.org. Those are going to be really good ways for you to stay engaged. In addition to our member email, in addition to our social media presence, those are things that I really encourage you to stay connected with.
Quick note on KS Ledge lookup, KSLEG lookup.org. So it will not turn over to the 25 until votes are taken, right? So because we score the votes, it doesn't turn over to the current session until votes are taken. There's an additional link on that site. There's a link on ksledgelookup.org where you can go and you can look up, again, by your address, your current representatives, senators, and we actually added county, and in some instances, if your city is large enough, city officials as well. So kslegislookup.org, click on the link that's there to right now, before the first vote that we score, find your current legislators.
So then a couple of action items for you today. We've got two ask of you. One, we talked about postcards earlier. We love sending postcards to our legislators because it tells them that we're watching them and that we're paying attention. So we created postcards. They say, this is not a church, and it has a picture of the State House. Please help us send these to your representative and your senator and let them know that you stand for separation of church and state. We have postcards over here for those who are on Zoom. I'll make sure that the file is uploaded so you can print your own, or we might be able to get them to you. If you're interested in hosting a house party and sending some postcards to folks, let us know. We can help you with that too. You can, of course, find the address on the KS Ledge website if you need to know where to send these postcards, or on Lookup as well, yes. Okay, and then we are also working, because we talked about local and school board and county commission and city council. We're working on postcards that also will feature those administrative buildings, so we can send them to our local folks as well, because we need to hit everybody with this message, anybody who has voting power. And then we're also working on a religious freedom proclamation. Religious Freedom Day is January 16th, and it is to honor the day that Thomas Jefferson wrote the letter to the Baptist, yes, Virginia Baptist, yes. And so it is typically seen as a day where we honor religious freedom.
Yeah.
More in the sense of what we were talking about earlier, that cringy kind of like protect my individual religious freedom. But we're making sure that our proclamation stresses the importance of religious freedom from a broader perspective, a broader sense of the definition, and call out specifically separation of church and state. So we are working with councils and commissions in Johnson County to have them issue this proclamation. If you would like to ask your city council, your county commissioner to also participate, let us know. We'll get that information to you. We have a couple samples if they're still over there on the table, or you may have already grabbed them. Anything else you want to say about that?
Proclamation, no, and it's okay if they issue the proclamation after the fact. A lot of times, cities will do that if they weren't able to meet before a specific day. As Laurel said, it was January 16th, but we might have some city councils in the area that meet after that. But if you want, talk to your mayors and your commissioners and see if they would proclaim January 16th Religious Freedom Day.
I hear Roland Park might be doing this.
I don't know, that guy. We'll see. We'll see.
Fair enough. You had one more ask of folks?
Yeah, so Laurel said we had 3 things for you to do, 3 actions, or 2 actions. We actually have 3. This is mainstream.
Yeah.
Right here. I know sometimes we hit and punch above our weight class, right? But we're 2 people and we need your help. So please be present, please be engaged, please donate. That's very important. If you found any part of today useful or helpful and you want to get involved, first, mainstreamcoalition.org, click donate. We are a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization, and we can't do the things that we do without your support, both as volunteers and financially. So
These guys cost $3 each, so if everyone's taking one, even if you could just donate $3, that would be amazing.
that is why she's on the board, folks. But well, it is now. That's what the basket's for now. Drop in your cash or checks or credit card. No, don't put your credit card in. But seriously, Liz is right. Like, everything we do costs money. And we do need your help to raise money to be able to continue our work to help you fight for separation and for religious freedom. Thank you so much.
And really quickly on that note, if you are interested in helping spread the word about Mainstream's work, one thing that we discovered is that Johnson County knows us pretty well outside of the state, or outside of Johnson County, maybe not as much. And even pockets of Johnson County don't know Mainstream as well as we'd like them to. We're happy to come to your events. We're happy to talk to folks. We're happy to show up at parties with our postcards. Let us know where you want us and we'll be there as much as we can with just the 2 of us. But yes, thank you for your time today. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for everything you're going to do this session, because we know you're going to be showing up, being loud and bringing a friend, right? Thank you.